Welcome, everybody, to our digestion workshop tonight. And if you are joining us, it's either because you or someone you know is struggling with digestion issues. So welcome. And we're going to be covering a lot of ground tonight. I'm excited about this workshop because of the folks that I have helped in the past with these issues. And the one that comes to mind the most is this woman who she was a teacher and also an athlete, and she was struggling with terrible gas. And for her, it was the embarrassment of it, that she was just struggling in such a way because of that. And so she got under care, and we took care of her and used some of the things I'm going to show you tonight of how she got her great results. And in not too short a period of time, not too long a period of time, the gassiness went away, and not only that, but her athletic performance improved as well. So what we're going to cover tonight, it's not just the same old. We're going to be going through the leading edge, what the most current approaches are that are working. We're also going to show you the things that are not working for people, and things you can do right at home for yourself to just jumpstart and go after this right away. And I want to just also recognize that a lot of times people have digestive problems and they don't really talk about it. It's maybe embarrassing for them, or, they just are, they don't want to share those kinds of issues with people. It's one thing to talk about low back pain or headaches, but it's another thing to talk about your gut. So just recognize that this is something that it affects all ages. It affects all male and female, all classes. It affects everybody. And so it's something that may be troubling more people than you would think. So you're not alone if you're on this workshop and you're struggling. And so let's jump right in. And I want to just also recognize that some of you are new to the call. And so somebody may have told you about it. But this is just one in a whole series that we do that we call the Body Signals series. So we cover a different condition each month. And so this is the one that we're covering this month. And I hope that I can offer you some great information to really help you get back on the trajectory to get to the goals that you do have. So I want to also share something that inspired me to work with folks that have digestive concerns. I have a colleague and his, let me just see if I can get my slides moving along here. There we go. Dr. Chris Zano. So before he was a chiropractor, he was actually Mr. America, maybe even Mr. Universe. Like he was really like high up in that whole genre of bodybuilding. And you would never think with somebody that fit that they would be struggling with digestive issues, but his problems were so bad that they said there's nothing they could do to help him. And the next step was to remove parts of his colon, to literally surgically go in and just cut them out. And so he felt like he had tried everything, gone to all the best doctors, and his best friend said, hang on now, you haven't tried chiropractic. And so he says, what have I got to lose? So he goes for chiropractic care. And he didn't see results immediately, but over time it got better. And finally, he was actually able to heal his entire gut. Now, he had a lot hanging on the table here because, he not only was his profession something where he needed to have that robust health, but he was about to get married. And they told him that once they removed his colon, he probably wouldn't be able to have kids. And so his whole life was just deteriorating in front of him. And so he said, it's worth it. Let me just try this chiropractic thing. And his results were so great. He completely healed himself that he changed careers and he trained and he went and became a chiropractor. So he is just a hero in my eyes of in our profession, but also how many people he has now been able to go on to help that were struggling just like he was. So it's a big problem. And the Body Signals program, what we recognize is that oftentimes, whatever the specific condition is that we're talking about, oftentimes it's just the tip of the iceberg, and it's a sign that there's something bigger happening that's a problem, and that's a bigger problem underneath. So the symptoms are your body's signals. It's your body's way of asking for help. And the question is, are you listening? And if you are listening, what are you doing about it? So oftentimes in our culture, we just try to mask those symptoms, just not feel them anymore. You know, my gut, it's painful. Can you just give me something that's going to help me not feel this gut pain? Or can you just give me something that, you know, I can just not be embarrassed by all this gas, or whatever it may be. And yet, those are the signals that your body is giving you to tell you, you better change something. And that is the key. Is I talk body all day long because I know what those signs and those signals are trying to say. And so I want to share that with you tonight to really understand, if you are having digestive issues, what is your body actually asking you to do? What's your best next steps, so that you can not just mask over the issue, but also really look at what can you do to heal it. And that's where we want to go with this evening. So first, let's just get a reference on symptoms themselves. So the symptoms are telling you what direction you're heading with your health. If we look at this illness-wellness continuum, we can see that it is a range. On the left side is near death, and on the right side is high-level wellness. And there's a whole continuum here. Pardon me. All right. And so on this continuum, it's not just a toggle switch of healthy or not healthy. It's actually a range, and everybody is going to be somewhere on this range. And so think about it yourself as I describe this range. So right in the middle here, we see part of this process. So on one side, we have the sick zone. On the other side, we have the healthy zone. But the middle is what we would call the not sick zone. It's not the same as being robustly healthy when you're just not sick. And when you think of being not sick, it means you don't necessarily have any symptoms, or there's no discernible illness or wellness that you can take note of. But as you start to lose function and you move further and further to the left, further towards early death, you'll notice that signs of you moving in that direction are the first thing that show up. But then symptoms also will start to show up. And then when those symptoms are no longer manageable, that's when you're now in a disability. And that's when you're on your way to a lower and lower function, and possibly an earlier death. So the difference between signs and symptoms is that with signs, it's something that you can measure. Signs are something you can measure, but not necessarily something that you feel. A symptom is something that you feel. So by the time you're feeling the symptoms, there may have already been signs that you were moving away from health. So the symptoms, when they start to show up, they are telling you you are moving away from health, and they're telling you you're moving in the direction that is going towards more and more dysfunction. So I think it's important to recognize that, because oftentimes with digestion issues, people wait until they have the symptoms that are bothering them, and then they're already further along in that dysfunctional level. So if we're going to make the best decisions regarding our health, and if our goals are to reach high-level wellness, then what do we need to do to get there? And so the symptoms tell us when we're moving away from health, but what are the things we need to do to move towards health? Well, again, if you're only basing your actions regarding your health on when you have symptoms, you've already waited a long time where you've lost function. You've moved away from health for a while. And now finally your body is starting to scream at you. Maybe it was whispering before, but now it's starting to scream at you. So let's look at this idea of when you feel something in your body, how does that work? And should you just trust how you feel, or is there more that needs to be looked at? Feeling versus function. So there are three parts to the central nervous system: the motor system, the sensory system, and the autonomic system. The motor nerves are what are controlling your muscles and your movement in your body. So if you had trouble there, you might notice weakness or spasms or fatigue or tightness. with your autonomic nervous system, that's the part that controls all the automatic functions in your body. So feeling, noticing that how your body's working as far as the organs go. So sinuses and allergies, low energy, digestive problems, breathing problems. Those are some examples of what might show up as a symptom in that category, that you might be noticing something. Now, sensory nerves are what are responsible for feeling things. And so sensory nerves are what are controlling your posture. They control your pain levels, and they also are they don't control your pain levels, but they perceive your pain levels. So when you feel pain, that's your sensory nerves. And then when you feel hot or you feel cold, that's your sensory nerves that are doing that. So I want you to understand all those different parts of the nervous system. And so now I'm just looking at the, yes, great. Thanks for putting that in the chat. Now and then I will check in on the chat, but I won't be able to watch it constantly. So if I take a little while to answer a question or something like that, just give me some grace there. All right, so when we look at the sensory nerves, it's what you feel things, and feeling hot, feeling cold, or feeling pain. So oftentimes people are waiting until they feel something before they do something about it. But the sensory nerves only make up 7% of the nervous system. The other 93% is made up of the motor and the autonomic. So they're running things, but you're not necessarily feeling things in those systems. So the sensory nerves are what feel things. So if we only are relying on how we feel, then we could be missing 93% of something that's going on that actually needs to be addressed. So then, therefore, what is the best way to proceed if you don't feel what's happening in your motor and autonomic nerves? I'm going to show you that later on, how we can actually measure that. And that's where the signs start to come in. So when you feel things, that's the symptoms. You've already lost a lot of function, but we could look and find things earlier on if we're looking at what the signs are and how to measure the function. All right, so now I want to go into some dangerous beliefs that get people into trouble. And you're gonna understand exactly what I mean by this. Drugs work. Well, maybe they do work. The problem is that people think they work to get to fix their problem. And they definitely can work to help to address a symptom, but is it actually healing you? Is it actually improving function? It was Dr. Marcia Angel, who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine for about 20 years. Imagine the research that she saw. And she said, you can never medicate your way into out of a situation you've behaved your way into. You'll just feel better as you're getting worse. So those medications, those drugs, they come with side effects as well. So sometimes you go down the route of taking drugs, trying to help yourself, and then the problem's getting worse and the drugs are not working any longer. And then you go to stronger drugs and more dangerous drugs, and then they have side effects. And now you get a whole new set of problems that have to be addressed. So sometimes what happens in our country is we have direct to consumer advertising by the pharmaceutical industry. And so people could be just watching a commercial and they suddenly think, I need to take that drug. And so instead of actually understanding any of the side effects or what it's going to do to their system, whether it's actually is it really going to heal the problem? Is it going to actually make you healthier? Or is it just going to be masking the symptoms? So here's an example of a commercial. Anybody recognize this guy, right? So this is, what's that guy's name? Larry the Cable Guy, something like that, right? And so here he is. And he is standing in front of the colossal corn dog shop, right? And so what he's doing, he's promoting Prilosec. And Prilosec is something that is a drug that is used specifically for heartburn or GERD, that kind of thing. And this advertisement is trying to get you to just take one a day over the counter to prevent you from getting reflux, so you can just continue living your life. So you can do anything you want with your diet, doesn't matter. Just take Prilosec once a day. You can eat those terrible corn dogs, right? And so they even have this newlywed couple enjoying all that life has to offer by preventing heartburn with a drug, right? Now, you know that with these drug commercials, they also have these, warnings on them. And look at what that fine print is here. It says, don't use it for more than 14 days and don't take it more often than every 4 months. Do you know how many people are on reflux medication ongoing for years, even though it says to not do that? And so it's trouble, because it means that the reason you're cautioned is that it could have some side effects. Well, what kind of side effects might you have if you were using this approach? Let's see. Oh, headache, abdominal pain. Wait a minute. Isn't that what you're trying to avoid? What? Irregular heartbeat, persistent muscle spasms, seizures, diarrhea, abdominal or stomach pain or cramping. There it is again. Fever, blood or mucus in your stool. That's not a good outcome for your digestive system. Rashes, itchiness, swelling, especially of the face, tongue, and throat. That sounds like an allergic reaction. A severe dizziness, trouble breathing. Like, those are some of the side effects. Okay, just sign me up for that, right? Okay, we need a better way. Who would agree? We need a better way. So let's start by having some premises that we can work from and some ground rules, because sometimes another dangerous belief is, okay, I'm not going to do the drug, but maybe I'll just wait and see. Maybe this will just get better on its own. So that's a dangerous belief, that the problems are going to go away if you ignore them. Okay, how many people here have ever had the experience of ignoring something and actually the outcome was it got much worse, it cost more, and it was harder and harder to fix, right? So when we ignore things and hope that they're going to go away, we get into trouble. So if you want to have better results, the first thing we need to do is you have to understand what the problem is. Once you understand the problem, then the solution becomes self-evident. So maybe it will go away. It's not going to get you any closer to the better results that you want to have. So let's take a hard look at the cause of most of the stomach problems that people struggle with today. And we need to just start them having a better premise about health and about healing. And so this is the premise that we work from. First, that you were designed to be healthy, that your body is smart. Now, I have taken advanced genetics testing or genetics trainings, and all about methylation and using nutrition to optimize genetics. And it is so interesting to me that with everything that we have learned about genes, what's actually true is that 99.6% of us actually have the perfect genome to express perfect health, as long as we have the right environment over time. That's actually what the research shows us. And yet, when people don't make the right lifestyle choices on a consistent basis, they start to actually cumulatively create problems for themselves. So if you're not expressing health, if healthy is normal and you're not expressing health, how can that be possible? It's because something is interfering with that healthy normal that you should be expressing. We know the body is smart. If we look at any evidence of that, it would be taking food in and turning that food into you, right? How smart is that? We don't even need to think about it, right? We have our heart thumping in our chests, 10,000 times today. We'll take about 10,000 breaths today, all that automatic. So the body is smart. If you cut your finger, it's going to heal up whether you put the Band-Aid on or not. So it's designed to be healthy. Healthy is normal. The body is smart. And the thing that is controlling every system in the body is the nervous system. So tonight we're going to be covering the whole length of the nervous system, from when you put food into your mouth and swallow it and hit your stomach, and people that are struggling with reflux or GERD or heartburn. And then it gets moving through, the food moves through your stomach into your small intestines and going through all of that, those miles of organ. And people are struggling with IBS or IBD or diverticulitis or diverticulosis or those kinds of things. And then you get to the end of your digestive system, and that's the large intestine, and people that struggle with constipation. So we're going to be dealing with the whole range here through the whole system. But let's start by understanding that the nervous system is the master system. So when you think about putting food into your mouth and chewing it, what is it that's controlling the muscles that are allowing you to chew? It's actually the nervous system. And when you swallow, you have an involuntary nervous system that is helping you to swallow. And you also have a voluntary system that's controlling that as well. They control it together. But both of those are parts of the nervous system. When it hits your stomach and you're secreting acid into the stomach to break down the food, it's the nervous system that's monitoring that. And then all that motion in the stomach that is mixing it all around. The integrity of the sphincters that stop the juices from the stomach going up into the esophagus. What controls that? The nervous system. How about the sphincter at the other end of the stomach that is allowing the food to go into the small intestine once it's been digested in the stomach? Oh, that's the nervous system. What controls the motility of the intestines? The nervous system. What controls the microbiome and the environment there? Well, certainly we have a whole environment that we have to take care of. Mucous membranes there and production of different things. It's all controlled by the nervous system. How about when it's time to poop, right? I know a woman who's an expert on the anus. Can you imagine that being your expertise? Your butthole, like knowing all about that. She is passionate about the anus because she says it is such a smart part of the body. It literally knows like when to open and when to close. And it knows, it can actually sense whether it's a gas that it's dealing with or a liquid that it's dealing with or a solid that it's dealing with. And she's just so passionate about how smart the body is at the very end of your bottom. So the nervous system is what's controlling all of that. And your spine is the suit of armor that is protecting your nervous system. Now, we know that life is stressful, and how many here would agree that when you have stress, it can affect your health? And certainly that is true. When you have stress, it can affect your health. So modern life is unnaturally stressful. And when I think of the nervous system and the spine, I think of it like a circuit breaker. And when a circuit blows, when does it blow? It's going to blow when there's an overload. So with the stressful lives that we lead, it actually can affect our nervous system, and that then starts to affect our function in our body. So we're going to unpack that. But first, let's recognize how stressful life really is. It's actually coming at us from 3 dimensions: thoughts, toxins, and traumas. So it's not just the mental emotional stress that we have. It's all that chemical stress that we're exposed to. And when we think of traumas, we think of a fall that you might take, or a car accident, or a sports injury, some sort of physical trauma like that. Certainly that can happen. But all of these categories, thoughts, toxins, and traumas, we can have the big events that occur that are really stressful. But in between those big events, we kind of have those ongoing low-level stresses occurring. And when we have the low-level stresses occurring, well, that's something we need to pay attention to, because those are impacting us just as much as anything else. And that's because of how consistent and constant they are. So, the deadlines, the chaos, the disorganization, those are mental, emotional stresses as well. Never mind the social media stress that we are all exposed to these days. When we think of toxins, we might be exposed to a poison at some point, but we also have the food that we're eating that may be, laden with pesticides or herbicides or artificial ingredients, preservatives, that kind of thing. So that's a stress to our system. And when we think of traumas, sure, we have the one-off events, but very commonly, the biggest physical stress that we have these days is being too sedentary, that we're just not moving our bodies enough. And that is a stress to the system. So when we have stress in the system, we're going to have an adaptive response to it. And so an adaptive physiology response basically is designed, it was designed in our genetics from 40,000 years ago and longer than that we would have this stress response, because it was there to save our life so that we could survive the next minute. That was the purpose of this stress response. So what happens when we're stressed? Blood pressure. And think about a situation where, you suddenly encounter a tiger. What is your body going to do? Blood pressure is going to go up. That's the first thing that we can name here, because we need to get the blood out to the body, out to the muscles, so we can fight that tiger or run as fast as possible. So blood pressure will go up, heart rate will go up in order to keep pumping that blood. Our muscle tone increases. We get tightness in the muscles because we have to be ready to run or to fight. Our cholesterol is going to go up. Now, why would that happen? That's because we use cholesterol to repair wounds. We also use cholesterol to make stress hormones. So cholesterol will go up because we have to be ready for that. Our clotting factors also go up. And again, that's because if we do get a wound from this tiger, we want to be ready to seal that wound as quickly as possible. Now, fear and anxiety, of course, we're going to be on alert when there's fear and anxiety. And so that keeps us hyper vigilant as well. Insulin sensitivity is going to be downregulated because we actually want to have higher blood sugar, because we're going to carry that blood sugar out to the muscles so that they can be used as fuel. So that means blood sugar is going to go up. Now, our immune response is going to be downregulated. And the reason for that is the immune system is a very expensive system to run. It costs a lot of energy. And so if you're about to fight a tiger, your body's going to prioritize surviving the next minute. And that means shut down that immune system. That's for long-term healing. And as soon as we're done fighting this tiger, we'll kick that immune system back on. But right now, survive the next minute, no go for the immune system. And of course, sex drive is going to be downregulated. Not a good time to make babies when you're fighting a tiger. Decreases in serotonin are going to also be showing up, because it's not a good time to sleep if you're encountering a tiger. And that means sleep cycles are going to be interrupted as well. But not only that, digestion is going to slow down and stop. Now, as soon as you encounter that tiger, there might be an increase in digestive movement to just empty that colon, just get it out fast, right? But then as soon as that happens, it's going to slow down digestion, because again, it costs energy, and now is not the time to be eating. Now is the time to be fighting. So this is a perfect response. And it's the perfect way for us to adapt to an acute stressor, meaning suddenly there it is in front of us, a tiger. However, if the stress is ongoing low-level stress, like deadlines or chaos or disorganization, then this is going to be a problem if this is how we are consistently. So this adaptive physiology was only meant to be turned on from a short-term stress. It was never meant to be turned on for long-term stresses that just never seem to end. And so let's now do a little look at the autonomic nervous system. And this is how our body is able to go into these stress responses. So when I'm just going to move this bar off to the side if I can here. There we are. Okay, so when we look at the autonomic nervous system, there's two parts to it. There's the parasympathetic, which is all about rest, repair, digestion, and reproduction. And then we have the sympathetic, which is all about fight or flight. So this is an on-off system. This is a toggling system. If your brain is perceiving that there's a stress that you need to deal with, you will turn on the sympathetic and you'll turn off the parasympathetic. And so those two parts of the nervous system, they're kind of like a yin-yang way of running the organs. And the stress hormones that we create are also helping to push that adaptive physiology to move things in a certain direction. So that's autonomic nervous systems. That's one way to look at the nervous system. We're now going to look at the idea of nerve supply. So I'm going to just point out a little bit here. I know this image is a little bit small, but I want you to just notice that the brain, of course, is in charge of running everything. It has to send the messages down the spinal cord, but then those messages down the spinal cord are going to go out through the peripheral nerves to get to all the body systems, all the organ systems. So we have the central nervous system sending messages along the peripheral nervous system to get to the organ systems. And then the tissues of the body will send messages back through the peripheral nervous system, up the spine, back to the brain to tell the brain what's going on. And then the brain will take that information in, and then it will respond by sending new messages out to alert the body of what it needs to do next. If we look at the map of the nervous system, where these nerves are going, you'll notice right at the top of the spine, there's this blue nerve that comes out. We call that the vagus nerve. And look what it's in charge of controlling, not just structures of the head, but it comes out and it controls the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the small intestines, the liver, the pancreas, the adrenals, the spleen, the small intestines, all the way down to the large intestines. All of that is being controlled by the vagus nerve, which comes out from the very top of the spine. Now, at the bottom of the spine, we have nerves that come out that take care of the rest of the organs. Again, large intestine, but also the bladder, the reproductive organs, and so on. Now, right in the middle, we have these nerves that come out, and look where they go. Oh, well, they also go to the heart and the lungs, and the nerves coming out of here, they go to the digestive system, and the nerves that come out of here, they go to the large intestine, and so on. And so the blue nerves that come from the top and the bottom, those are the parasympathetic parts of the nervous system for rest and repair, digestion, and sleep. The yellow nerves in the middle of the spine are the sympathetic nerves. And they, again, are controlling all these things, but those are the ones that are in charge when it's a fight or flight situation. And so that's how the brain is able to control all of the organs, kind of a foot on the brake or a foot on the gas. It has to decide what it needs to do. And then part of its control is controlling the hormonal system and telling the hormonal system what it needs to do next. Now, we can see this circuit breaker, the fuse box. That's the way I think of the spine. And so the wires that are going out to different rooms in the house, well, these wires, otherwise known as the peripheral nervous system, are going to certain organ systems. And now you can understand what those systems are. And then we have the spine, which is protecting the central nervous system. And so the bones of the spine are surrounding and protecting the spinal cord, just the same way the skull protects the brain, so that we can protect this vital system so it can do its work without being damaged. Now, if there is any misalignment in the spine, similar to a circuit blowing in a circuit breaker or a fuse blowing, then that could interfere with the flow of messages going back and forth between the brain and the body. And when that happens, that is an interference. And when you have an interference in the control of your organs and your brain being able to take care of things and controlling the function of the body, if there's something that's interfering with that, then we're going to expect to see breaking down in function. And so that's the big idea of what chiropractic is based on, is if you want to have a healthy body, you need a healthy nervous system. If you want to have a healthy nervous system, you need a healthy spine. And a healthy spine means that there's no short circuits happening there, that the information is free to flow back and forth without interference. Now, the things that are going to be interferences in your health, remember, healthy is normal. We're designed to be healthy. If you're not experiencing the health that you want, it means something's interfering with it. And there's only two things that can interfere with it. It's either toxicities, deficiencies, or both. So when it comes to the nervous system, there could be nerve irritation that is interfering with the flow of messages, or there could be nerve compression that's interfering with the flow of messages. So you could either have an irritated nerve or a nerve that is not doing enough of the job that it needs to be doing. So if we look at this idea of the subluxation, that's an interference in the nervous system due to misalignments of the vertebrae. The first part of that is that there will be joint misalignments. The joint misalignments cause soft tissue damage. That soft tissue damage then causes inflammation, which is then going to cause irritation to the nerves that are coming out from between the bones. Your smart body may take the muscles that are attached to these bones, those muscles that typically are going to be moving those joints, and instead of moving them, if there's nerve irritation, it may spasm those muscles to strap that joint down so the joint no longer moves because it wants to protect that irritated nerve. Now, the disc that is here in between the vertebrae, The only way a disc can get fluid in and out is similar to a sponge. It doesn't actually have a very good blood supply. And so instead of pumping blood and nutrients and oxygen in and pumping toxins out through blood vessels, instead the disc uses a method called imbibition. So imbibition is like a sponge. If you squeeze a sponge, the water comes out. And when you release the sponge, it can suck the water back in. And that's how a disc stays healthy, is by movement of the joint. And when you move and compress and then release, then that's going to allow the nutrients to be sucked in and the toxins to be squeezed out. So if you have muscle spasms that are persistent, that don't go away, then you're going to lose that imbibition. And the loss of imbibition is going to cause degenerative changes in the discs. Now, when you spasm the muscles, you're also going to cause a fixation in that joint, we call it, where that joint is no longer moving and it has lost its range of motion. All of the joints in the body will be sending signals to the brain using something called a mechanoreceptor. Mechanoreceptors are what will tell the brain that there's movement happening in a joint. And so the brain actually can track where the body is in space by all the signals that are coming from the mechanoreceptors all over the body. As those mechanoreceptors send signals through the nervous system, up through the spine and up to the brain receives the message, and it really can now locate where the body is in space. And we call that proprioception. Proprioception is the brain's ability to know where the body is in space. Proprioception is actually, we think of it as a sixth sense. Our five senses, which are all nervous system, seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and touching, that's all nervous system. But proprioception is also nervous system. And in fact, there's more of the brain devoted to perceiving proprioception than there is all the other five senses. So when there's a joint fixation, then that mechanoreceptor is not going to be firing because it's still. The joint is still, it's not moving. And if the joint doesn't move, it won't fire the mechanoreceptors, and the brain will not get information about what's happening in that area of the body. And when it loses track of what's happening, the brain now starts to go into a stress response about that because it doesn't know what's going on down there. So if you've ever gone to the fair in the summer, crowds of people, and there's the families, they're all there, and there's the mama walking along, holding hands with the little child. And the next thing you know, that little child loosens its grip and disappears into the crowd, and the mother just goes into stress mode. Where's my kid? And so that's what happens to the brain when it doesn't get the signals that it's relying on to tell the brain where the body is in space. And so therefore, when we have that joint fixation, very quickly after that persists, we're going to start to get elevated stress hormones. Our body's going to start being flooded with cortisol and those stress hormones because the brain now is stressed because it's not able to track where the body is in space. Now, I know I'm going into great detail here. We do like to geek out on these webinars because in order to really understand what's happening, we have to get to a certain level. So how would we know if we had stresses that were overloading us? How would we know if we had subluxations that were actually at a stress mode point? We actually can measure it. And there's two technologies that we use in the office that specifically are measuring stress. One is called heart rate variability. And so the green is the bullseye that we want to see people landing in. The white dot is the measurement for that person. So we want that white dot to be right in the bullseye as a sign that that person is readily and appropriately adapting to the stresses that they are exposed to. And they have the reserves and the capacity to be able to manage that stress. When we see the white dot down here at the edge of the yellow ring, that tells us there is not enough capacity, not enough reserves for that person to be able to manage the current stress level that they have. And it's when we are overwhelmed or overloaded with stress, that's when it will affect our health. If we're managing those stresses, we may be getting stronger from that. So it's not that we want to avoid stress, it's that we want to readily and appropriately adapt to that stress. If you want to get stronger muscles, you have to stress them in order to have them get stronger. So if we want a strong body, we have to continually stress it, but we have to stress it within the capacity that we have, within the reserves that we have. And so oftentimes the approach in our world is, oh, you're stressed out about that? Just stop doing that. Just stop exposing yourself to that stress. Whereas in our office, we want to get the system healthier so it can actually have greater capacity, greater reserves, greater ability to readily and appropriately adapt to any stress that comes along. So that's an important thing that we can measure with each individual patient in our office. We also can use the thermography to measure the nerves that are exiting the spine and going out to certain organs in the body. And so we literally can look at which organs may be being affected and having dysfunction because of these subluxations and misalignments in the spine. And so in this case, if you remember from what we just looked at, the nerves that come out in the middle of the back are the sympathetic nerves that are in charge of controlling the digestive organs. So everything to do with digestive issues is a lot of that is happening in the middle of the spine. But we also said there's the parasympathetic that comes out from the bottom of the spine. That's going to innervate the large intestine, the bladder, the reproductive organs. So this tells us so much about where the subluxations are now impacting the function in the body. So what is it that causes the subluxations? As we said, it's going to be overload, overwhelm, stress that we're not adapting to. That's what's going to cause subluxations. So sure, you could have a big car accident that would jar the spine. That could cause a subluxation. But again, in between the events of jarring the spine, we have that ongoing stress. And one of the biggest stresses that we have that's cumulative in our modern world actually is being sedentary, sitting too much, sitting with poor posture, with bad habits, looking at devices. So use of devices is a big one here. And so that's something that we have to actually, we have to have better spinal hygiene. And that's what we're training people to do. And remember that these bad habits, they're cumulative, they add together. And so it's kind of like a cavity. If you chip your tooth, you can fix that whenever you want. Take as long as you want to fix that. But if you have a cavity and you wait, it's just going to get worse and worse. And so if we have subluxations that are uncorrected, they're more like cavities than chipped teeth. And the stresses that we're exposed to become cumulative, like spending too much time at a screen or a monitor, or the whole tech neck, if you haven't heard that word, right? Tech neck is from all the technology that we're using and how it's affecting our posture, and that affects our spine and our nervous system. Now let's go dive into the conditions that I see coming into my office and how we address them. And we're going to start at the bottom of the digestive system. We're going to start with this, what happens in the colon, which is the chronic constipation that people can have. And so, again, it's not something that people like to talk about. So you may be surprised at how many people actually struggle with constipation. And if you struggle with it, you are not alone. So what is actually happening? Well, remember that it's a serious issue. Constipation is a serious issue because an engine is only as good as its exhaust system. So if the exhaust is not getting out of the car, it's going to be really causing damage. And so if we're not getting toxins out of our body on a regular basis, then it's going to affect the rest of the body as well. So let's look at what is happening here with constipation. It's all about the muscles. It's all about the tone. Just like the tone that's moving food along all the way from when we swallow it, that's the tone through the whole digestive system. The digestive tract is very sophisticated and it has a whole series of involuntary smooth muscles. But like any muscle, we could end up with tonal issues. So nerves are what are controlling the movement of food along the tract, right? Including the mastication, the chewing, the motility, swallowing. It's voluntary and involuntary. So we're going to swallow, and that bolus of food that we've chewed in our mouth is going to move down the digestive tract. And it's all very specialized tissues as it moves along, and it's all controlled by the nervous system. And it's again controlled by that parasympathetic sympathetic balance. They both have an influence. So the stomach is there to grind down and break down foods. We need a certain pH or acidity of the system in order to get those digestive enzymes working. Well, what is it that controls that? The nervous system. And we have the liver, the pancreas that are providing those digestive enzymes. What controls the liver and the pancreas? The nervous system. We need a healthy lining of the GI tract with mucus production and controlling the pH. Again, the nervous system controls that. And then drawing the nutrients and the water out of the bowels to reuse again in the body. What controls that? Again, it's the nervous system. So again, there are the three nervous systems in the body: the sensory, the autonomic, the sensory, the autonomic, and the nerve and the motor system. And in the digestive tract, we actually have, it's so intrinsically connected that we even talk about a gut brain. When we talk about a gut brain, we're talking about, that we have the brain, and we have the gut brain. But the gut brain, it's talking about the nervous system in the gut. So as food moves along in this process, we can end up with tonal issues. And if we have chronic subluxations that are causing chronic stress levels, so we have chronic stress hormones, that's going to slow down that GI tract. Remember, we said that when we're in a stress response, we're going to slow down digestion. So that's one of the parts of this, is that we could have chronic subluxations causing chronic cortisol levels, chronic stress, and then we're just chronically slowing down that digestion. And it's going to interrupt the normal flow through the system, and we're going to have all kinds of chronic digestive issues with that as well. So when we check the spine, we typically find that constipation is associated with this. And so I want to just show you a picture of this. And again, there can be the mental emotional stresses that you are directly thinking about that could be related to constipation. Like, for example, some people, when they travel, they're kind of maybe a little nervous, or they just are not comfortable. They don't feel at home. And so they get constipated when they travel. Or kids that will never, poop at school because they're too stressed out. They're not actually at their comfortable home environment. So that's stress levels. So we know that it affects it in that way, but there's more to it than that, because it could be related to subluxations. So when we look at where those subluxations typically are with chronic constipation, we're usually going to find it at C1 to C3. That's right at the top of the spine. Why is that? Because that vagus nerve, which is the parasympathetic, the rest, relax, the digestion, if it's not getting to do its job, then it's going to be an imbalance, and there's going to be more of the sympathetic dominance. So remember, it's a yin-yang balance. So we can either have high cortisol levels that are driving the sympathetic nervous system to be ready for fight or flight, which is going to slow down digestion, or we could have an interference in the parasympathetic that would like to be able to have everything be relaxed right now, but there's an interference in the flow of messages. So C1 to C3 is a common area of subluxation, including in children, including in babies. This is the most common area that we'll find it. Now, also L1 and L2, and you'll see that's this area right here. Why is that? Oh, that's the nerve supply that comes out for the sympathetic. And that may be an irritated area that's sending irritated messages to the bowels, keeping the bowels in an irritated state, and that loses the tone. L5 to S3 also could be involved. Again, that's that parasympathetic balance. So when we think of chronic constipation, I think of it as a neurological issue because of these vagus nerve involvement, spastic blockages from the L1, L2, and just the overall bowel tone and motility being dropped down from the subluxations in the lumbar sacral area. And, it is important also to recognize that the posture can be an impact here. So if you have poor posture and that's creating more stress on the vagus nerve, that could be one of the things that's responsible for constipation as well. All right. So if you are struggling with any of these kinds of things, and you want to talk it down and see whether we can help you with this, if you struggle with constipation, please feel free to send us a text message. If you just say gut talk and you send it to our number 802-985-9850. If you send us that text message, it's going to alert my team that you would like to get yourself scheduled for a 10-minute conversation with me, and we can talk it down and find out the nuances of what's actually happening in your life, and we can find out whether or not we can help. So I'm happy to do that. That's complimentary. There's no charge for that. Happy to talk it down with you. So feel free to text us and let us know if you'd like to set up a call. Now, how about irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, celiac, diverticulosis, that kind of thing? Those things that can start to affect as we start to move into the intestines. And if we look at the gut wall, and again, the gut wall is going to be, this is going to be throughout the entire digestive system from the stomach onward. The stomach itself also has these different types of villi, and I call them mountains and valleys because it increases the surface area for secreting the digestive enzymes and so on. But as we move past the stomach and now into the small intestines, we had to have a tube, and that tube has a gut lining, which we can see right here. This is a picture of the gut wall. So you can see all these different villi are sticking up out of the lining of the gut wall. And remember that even though we use the phrase, you are what you eat, actually, it's not quite accurate, because in order for something to become us, it has to be digested and then metabolized and absorbed into our body. And it's only once it gets through the gut wall and into the body that it actually becomes us. So basically, the GI tract, when we have these concerns of irritable bowel or Crohn's or celiac, it's inflammation that's happening in the GI tract all the way through. And the GI tract, we could think of it just as a very sophisticated hose with tube openings at each end. So when you swallow food, it's not actually inside you until it's broken down and absorbed and metabolized in your body. So we have to now look at, what determines what comes in and out of you is the walls of the GI tract. And so the lumen is the lining, and it's kind of like a hose with an inside wall to it. And the health of the inside wall is what's involved with a situation like IBS or Crohn's. So if we look at this gut wall, it is a barrier from the inside, and it's a barrier that is the surface between our bloodstream and the outside of our body. So what we're looking at right here is the inside of the intestines, but it's actually the outside of the body because it's not connecting with the bloodstream yet. It's not actually inside our body yet. And so I'm going to show you the anatomy of the gut wall itself. And we're going to look at the tight junctions and permeability and the loose junctions and leaky gut and the immune response that comes with that. So if you zoom in on the GI tract, you're going to see these hills and valleys. And this curvy pattern is to increase the surface area, as I've said, so that we can pull out nutrients and exchange water. And if we zoom in even more on the little fingerlings, then that's what we're going to look at in a minute. This is highly sensitive tissue, and it ultimately is going to determine who you are and what you are, because it determines what food and nutrients you're going to be able to absorb into your body. And it's the nervous system that maintains the health of the gut. So let's now, what was this human gut lining and digestive system designed for? We have to look at ancestral diets and compare it to our current diets if we're going to answer that question. So if we look at this idea of grains and looking at a Paleolithic diet style, grains, they just are not good for us. And the reason they're not good for us, I know, even whole grains, even organic whole grains, it's because when we look at, the base of the food pyramid today, it just talks about everybody should have 17 servings of grains a day. That's the whole foundation. And when you think about just the idea of what a grain is, it's a seed. And if you think of our ancestors and what they would have been eating, our ancestors, and I'm talking 40 to 60,000 years ago, like 3,700 generations ago, that's when our genes were set. That's when the design of our body was made to function in this environment of our world. So what did the original human diet style look like? Well, were they eating grains back then? Were they actually grinding up little seeds? No, they weren't. What they would do is they would eat the rabbit that ate the grains and the grasses and the seeds. So the rabbits are designed to be able to metabolize that. And so they would get the benefit of the nutrients of the grains by eating the rabbit. So they would eat the meat and the greens, but they wouldn't eat the grains. And so they'd eat the animals that ate the grains, and that's how they would get it. They'd eat the fruit of the trees, sometimes the leaves of the trees, but not the seeds. So we eat fruits and vegetables, and then the tree itself in leaves, but the seeds are what make the tree. So what is a seed's job? A seed falls on the ground and dies. It goes into the soil, it breaks apart, and it breaks down into a very hostile environment so that it can then grow new life into a tree. And that's supposed to grow more fruit and then more seeds and so on. So the cycle continues. But that seed is covered with anti-nutrients like gluten, gliadin, phytic acid. And these are anti-nutrients, meaning they're toxicant elements. And they exist in the seed and the grain to protect it in the soil so that it doesn't get fungus on it. And so the other things don't eat it before it has a time to turn into a plant that's going to grow into a tree. And its purpose is to kill off everything else around it so that it can allow it to grow into the plant that it needs to. So these toxicants, they can actually irritate a very sensitive gut lining wall. And so we can end up with irritation, and that irritation can then lead to leaky gut syndrome. So the sources of these toxicants are because of the seeds having that design to protect themselves. And even more recent ancient cultures from 3000 BC up to a few hundred years ago that had no evidence of chronic illness, they would never have consumed grains the way that we do. They would always have either soaked, sprouted, or fermented these grains. And so essentially the soaking, the sprouting, the fermenting, it actually neutralizes the anti-nutrients and makes them fit for human consumption. However, the grains would also have been part of an entire complex diet style of daily fermented foods, minimal sweeteners, no processed foods, and they would never included the modern hybridized grains that we have today, never mind the GMO versions of these. And so if you add the ubiquitous use of herbicides and pesticides that we use today, like Roundup or glyphosate, which works in pests by destroying gut function. So all of these things come along with the grains. They're acidic, they have low nutrient density, they are high in omega-6s, which pushes an inflammatory environment for us. They have a high glycemic index, and then they have all of these irritant properties to them as well. And so let's now look at this idea of leaky gut. So if we take the lining of the stomach, and so basically what we're looking at is this is the inside, not the lining of the stomach, but the lining of the digestive system in and of itself. This is the tube, the inside of the tube where food is passing through. As it's being digested, it's passing along. And then here is the blood flow right here on the other side of the lining of the gut. And so the lining of the gut has these intestinal cells right here, all going all along, and they have these junctions, and they should have a normal tight junction, and that normal tight junction is going to be able to be selective on what it's going to allow to come in that will then be able to get into the bloodstream. If we have inflammation in the lining of the gut, then we're going to have a leaky gut, meaning we're going to lose those tight junctions. Now, when we're digesting food, we're breaking it down into smaller and smaller bits. So for example, a protein that we digest, it's going to break down into amino acids. And those amino acids are the building blocks that we need to build our own tissue. But we need to build our own tissue from amino acids that are completely broken down into their individual amino acids. If a protein gets into the bloodstream, the body says, what is that protein doing there? I can't do anything with a protein. I need it to be broken down into an amino acid. So if a protein is getting in, the body says, we need to destroy this because it is not in any form that we can use. And so it'll go after it and destroy it. But as it destroys it, it is also going to tag it so it can remember it. And if a protein gets in, it actually can set up an allergic response because the body is saying, what is that protein doing there? And the next time I see that, I'm going to go after that because that's an inflammatory thing. That's something that should not be in the bloodstream. So if I see it in any other form, I'm going to go after it as soon as I can. And so then the next thing you know, you're just putting it into your mouth. It hasn't even reached your bloodstream. And the body's already got an allergic response to it because somehow that protein got into the bloodstream. And that may be because of a leaky gut. So if you have a leaky gut, you don't have the tight junctions, then these bigger proteins can actually get through when they shouldn't be there. It should only be the amino acid that gets through. So that's what can happen here in the lining of the gut. So these cells, they're like little bricks, and they have that little bit of mortar in between them. And that's what that tight junction is. And so if you eat a grain and it's irritating these tight junctions, then the brick wall starts to get loose and the mortar starts to break up and the proteins start to get through that shouldn't be getting through. And then that's irritating the immune system. And the next thing you know, we're getting swelling and inflammation and mucus as our body is trying to deal with an inflammatory situation. So, this is just a basic understanding, kind of the cartoon level, but enough for you to get that we have a gut lining, and if it's irritated, it's going to start to interfere. And so if you have subluxations that are causing nerve interference, that can cause a weakness in the GI tract as well. And so then you start putting the foods in that aren't supposed to be there, and you're getting even more irritation, and then the body can't heal it, and then you're ending up with leaky gut syndrome. And when you have leaky gut syndrome, what you also have is leaky brain, leaky kidneys, leaky blood vessels, and the whole mix. Now, there is one substance that I want to actually cover that has a big effect on digestion, and that is glyphosate. Glyphosate, also known as Roundup, and that has been used so ubiquitously in farming practices that it has now become, it's going everywhere. And what's happening is, we did inherit a genome from 3,700 years ago to be a healthy human being. And with all that uniqueness, we have the perfect ability to express perfect health, but we have to have the right environment. And glyphosate was never meant to be part of our environment. And so it actually is a stress to our system. So we start with having our DNA, but then we have the epigenetics, and the epigenetics is how the environment starts to affect how the DNA can express itself. So how our DNA expresses is based on the environment we have. And if we have toxins and poisons in our environment, it may actually cause disease-expressing genes to start to upregulate. And when we've altered our environment so much that many of the genes that would have been dormant in a healthy environment are woken up, and now they're turned on in an unhealthy environment. And then if we add to that the 3 dimensions of stressors, physical, chemical, emotional stresses, then that puts us in that high cortisol state, which drives more inflammation. And then we start to destroy the gut lining with grains and glyphosate. Right now we're getting into trouble. So when that microbiome, the gut, that is so important that we are maintaining a healthy microbiome in order to have healthy digestion. And glyphosate actually makes both mercury and aluminum more toxic. So if we have any exposures to that in our environment and you add the glyphosate, now that's going to have even more of an effect on us. And so they're recognizing that actually is affecting an entire generation of children that have been exposed to glyphosate. Ever since we started to use glyphosate, it's actually affecting the health of our kids more and more. Now, I want to introduce you to a product that was created by a doctor named Dr. Zach Bush. And he was a medical doctor, and he did his residency, and he was he was actually working with cancer. And while he was in his residency, he was doing some research for cancer, and he found that there was this this approach that he thought would actually help to cure cancer. And when he showed it to his the leader of the lab said, yeah, well, we're not going to be making that, because we can't make any money with that substance, because it's not a drug that you're looking at, it's actually a nutrient that you're looking at. And so he really got disillusioned by that whole experience. And when he went out into private practice, he really wanted to help his patients with nutrition. So he set up a practice in Appalachia, so in a pretty poor community, and he just wanted to help them improve their nutrition. And as he was struggling along trying to help them, one of his colleagues gave him a paper to read, and the paper was all about soil and the health of how to have healthy soil. And so he was flipping through it, and he suddenly saw that there was a benzene ring, a chemistry picture, and he recognized it as that was the same pattern that he had discovered that would help cancer. And so it got his attention, like, what is this? And it turns out that it was an image showing a communication substance that is found in healthy soil. And that when we grow plants in that healthy soil, and then when we eat those healthy plants, that we will get this communication substance into our body, and it helps our cells communicate with each other, so that cells that are sitting right next to each other, like the bricks in the lining of the cell membrane, of the bricks in the lining of the digestive system with those tight junctions, that when those cells are sitting next to each other, they can communicate with each other. And a healthy cell can say, yeah, I'm a healthy cell. And a sick cell that needs healing can say, hey, wait a minute, I'm a sick cell, I need some help. And then a cell that actually has passed its expiration date and should just be dead right now, but is still there because there's a loss of communication. Now we start to have poor quality tissue, and we start to have the leaky gut. So what he recognized was, if we had this communication substance, it literally could help the healthy cells stay healthy and communicate that healthiness. It helps the sick cells to actually get the help that it needs because it's communicating. And then it helps the cells that should be dead to just die off. And so in the soil, what this communication substance does is we have this whole communication network in the soil, like in a forest. And if one tree is experiencing a blight of some sort, it actually sends messaging through the communication system through the soil, so that the trees on the other side of the forest will hear, oh, there's a blight coming our way, we better suck up more boron to help to prevent that particular pest from harming us. And that's how trees in a forest communicate. And it has to be in the presence of this particular communication substance. So when Dr. Zach Bush discovered this, he said, I've got to get this for my patients. So he created this. So this is, it used to be called Restore, but now it's been branded as Ion Gut Health or Ion Biome. And it is that communication substance. And so it actually helps to have a healthier human microbiome, because it helps the communication in the cells of the lining of the gut. And what he noticed was that if you put glyphosate into a petri dish that had the cells that make up the lining of the intestine, that glyphosate would actually cause leaky gut. It would cause those cells to break down. But if he had the Ion Gut Health actually in the petri dish with those cells, and he added glyphosate, it protected them. And if they had been damaged and he added the Ion Biome, it actually helped them to heal those tight junctions. So this is a really important product, and we carry it right here in the office. It helps to repair the damage of glyphosate, it protects against it, and it restores the gut lining. And because 80% of the immune system lives in the gut lining, that it actually has a big impact on our entire immune system. So when the leaky gut barriers are compromised and the toxins and undigested proteins instead of the amino acids start to get in, we start to get allergies. And again, that's going to affect leaky gut, which affects leaky brain. That's going to affect the blood-brain barrier. That's going to impact mental clarity and so on. So this is a product that I not only recommend to people with digestive issues, I actually recommend it to everybody. And especially if you're not sure where your food is coming from and whether it may have glyphosate, because now we know when they spray glyphosate, 10% of it goes onto the crop and the other 90% is blown in the wind. And so now they're finding glyphosate almost everywhere. So it's something we really do have to pay attention to. Now, some of you, I mentioned genetics. There's a, yeah, so it's ion gut. So you can find it here at the office when you come in if you're interested in that. And the, yeah, the old name for it was Restore. The other nickname for it was Healthy Dirt Water. I love that. Now, when we are looking at the gut and we need to be addressing it, there's a process that we will look at. And so it's a whole process where we are going to be weeding, seeding, feeding, and then healing and sealing the gut. So if we're going to weed the gut, what that means is we want to get rid of the bad guys, the bad bugs in our microbiome. If we don't have a healthy, diverse microbiome, we have to weed out the bad bugs. And so we use a combination of andrographis, berberine, oregano, and anise, and that's in a product called Gut Flora Complex. And so we use that along with berberine and myrrh as a way to weed out the bad guys. And then when it's time to seed the healthy probiotics, we want to introduce a probiotic. So there are many versions of probiotics that are out there. I like to test people so that I can see which is the best fit for them. And that's how we seed the gut. And then we need to feed those new microbiome pieces that we just seeded. And we can use fiber, rosemary, green tea, grapeseed, and turmeric are all excellent ways to feed that healthy microbiome. And then when it's time to do some healing of the gut lining, there's a product called HiPep, which uses licorice, chamomile, and meadowsweet. And that's very soothing and healing to the gut lining. I also like to use the Ion Biome product, which I mentioned, aloe vera, okra. Okra, you know how gelatinous the okra is. If you've ever had that, that's actually excellent for the lining of the gut. And then when it's time to really seal the gut, again, the Ion product, as well as fiber, are the things that can help to seal the gut. So that's the process that we do when we need to do healing at that level. Now, some of you know, as I said, that I work with genetically based nutrition. And so for this, what we do is we actually find that there are some folks that they may have a genetic predisposition to having gut issues, things that they've inherited, vulnerabilities that they've inherited from their parents. And so the way that we would approach that is we have people do a genetic test, and we use a company that's called My Happy Genes, so that we use that company because when you send in the sample, they don't save that sample. They actually, once they've used it and done the testing, they destroy the actual tissue sample that you sent in after 90 days. So they're not keeping anybody's genetic material the way other companies like 23andMe and Ancestry, they actually hold on to that genetic material and use it for other things. So we do have that company that we use, and they are the company that tests the most health-related genes of any other company. They test about 500, maybe more of them by now. And so you get a report, a detailed report that shows pages and pages and pages of your genetic SNPs, and it shows whether you have inherited two healthy genes on each gene has a certain function in the body. And so when you inherit those genes from your parents, you may inherit two optimized ones, or one parent may have a variation that may be a potential vulnerability. So you might inherit that, but you also might inherit two vulnerabilities, one from each parent, and then you're even more likely to have the potential of expressing a vulnerability that could lead to a disease-causing genetic expression. So once we have your genetic testing in front of us, we can then match that up to either blood testing or even a symptom survey of the things that you're noticing, and we can match it to what genetic variabilities or genetic vulnerabilities you have. And then we know in the entire chemistry of the body what catalysts or enzymes are needed to actually optimize, to reconcile any weaknesses or vulnerabilities that you may have. So in the end, we can actually come up with the genetically perfect multivitamin for you. You know, when you get a multivitamin, it's got like 20 different things in it. And even if it's a good quality one, everybody that takes it is taking the same thing, even though everybody's genetically different. So this is a way for us to actually optimize any genetic vulnerabilities that you may have through nutrition. So if you want to hear more about that, just let me know. I'm happy to tell you more about that. And if you'd like to pursue that, we'll tell you how it works. And so if we look at diet, what foods am I supposed to be eating? So let's just go again to the basics, and we're looking at the again based on paleo lifestyle. And so when we look at this, the do's and the don'ts, whoops, let's go back here. When we look at the do's and the don'ts, the do's are non-starchy vegetables, some fruit, meat, poultry, fish, range-fed eggs. And again, the meat and the poultry and the fish, we want it to be the grass-fed, pastured, free-range, wild-caught, so that it doesn't have the pesticides and the grains that are fed to the meats and so on that make it inflammatory. Range-fed eggs, natural fats, some nuts and seeds, and we want to drink water. What we want to avoid are the refined carbohydrates, the cereals and the grains, the sweeteners like cane sugar and that sort of thing. There are healthy sweeteners we can look at, like the maple syrup, honey, coconut palm sugar, and so on. The bad vegetable oils we want to avoid. Now, the exceptions are, and the bad ones are going to be things like canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, and so on. The exceptions are olive oil, avocado oil, palm oil, and coconut oils. Those are the good plant-based oils. We want to avoid legumes because they have that same protective chemicals on them as a seed does. And dairy products also can be very inflammatory. Again, if you're eating dairy products, look at the fermented ones like the yogurt or the kefir. Look at the raw dairy products that still have all the enzymes to break them down, whereas pasteurization is actually going to destroy the enzymes that would allow us to break down dairy products. So raw dairy is going to be a much better way to go if you are going to consume it. And then avoiding soda, juice, alcohol, just stick with water. So those would be the do's and the don'ts. And the closer that you can keep to the healthy diet style that comes from 40,000 years of genetic demands and getting the really high quality meats, the more you can stick to that, the healthier your gut is going to be. There's a great, if you're wondering about, I don't know how to cook that way, or what are the recipes that I could use, this is a gift to you. This is a free cookbook. And if you are curious about it, you can go to Standard Process. I think I put yeah, there it is. That's the link right there. So you go to Standard Process and you can do a search on Standard Process. It's called the Purification Cookbook, but you could also just put in 1 degree of change and it'll come up that way too. This is a cookbook that we share with people that are doing a 21-day purification program that many people in our practice love to do at least once a year, maybe a few times a year, kind of like a detox. So coming up in January is when we usually do our next 21-day challenge of the purification program. So, but feel free to download a copy of this digital copy. If you want a hardcover book, we can actually order one for you. They're not too expensive. I think they're, I don't know, $10 or $20, something like that. But let us know if you'd like that. All right. So now if we talk about where the subluxation patterns correlate to things like irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, celiac, we tend to see C1 involved once again because of that vagus nerve, coming down and how it innervates the small intestines. And also T7 to T11, again, that's that digestive component that is affecting the stomach, the small intestines, the digestive enzymes, and so on. We think of it as a chemical theme for the irritable bowel, just because the grains and the gut lining are being irritated from the chemicals in our environment that you're eating, that sort of thing, the glyphosate and so on. And so also I would say that the vagus nerve is a big one with diverticulosis as well. This upper cervical subluxation is a big part of that. And also depending on where the diverticulosis is, if it's in the small intestines or large intestine, usually it's going to be in the large intestine. It's going to be at the bottom of the spine, subluxations as well. So again, the subluxation affects the tone, the motility, the tolerance, and the health of the gut. And so if there are subluxations and then we put irritating things in as well, that just compounds what's happening to that gut lining. So I'm not going to go through an exhaustive discussion of this, but if you want to have a call and talk about it more, I'm happy to, but I want you to just have walk around knowledge of this about what you should and should not be eating and that kind of thing. But again, feel free to just text us if you would like to talk it down. Now, I want to just talk more about how these subluxations in the spine and how it relates. So we actually have research that shows that when you lose the proper alignment in the neck, that correlates to higher, people that have Crohn's disease oftentimes have this loss of the curve in the neck. What we want to have is a healthy normal. And so in the healthy normal, we're going to have a beautiful forward curve. So here's the jaw, here's the back of the head. So someone that's looking, they're looking stage left there. And we want to have a beautiful forward curve. And that forward curve, that means the spinal cord is going to be at ease and there's going to be give in the spine. So when we have that healthy normal curve, right, that correlates with healthy nerve function. These are the spines of people with Crohn's disease, 3 different people. You can see that they all have a loss of the alignment, loss of the alignment, loss of the alignment. And that as this improved, then their symptoms also improved. So there definitely is a correlation there. Next, we're going to go moving back up. We're going to look at the acid reflux and heartburn. GERD is another word that's used. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. And so what we see is here's the anatomy of the stomach. We have the food that has entered the stomach, and so it comes down through the esophagus. So when we swallow that bolus of food, it comes down the esophagus, and then there's a muscle right here that closes off, a sphincter, and it closes off. So it allows the food to come through when we swallow, and then it goes into the stomach. And the pH of the stomach is very acidic. And so it's all makes a liquidy substance as it breaks the food down with the stomach acids. And then as the food is broken down, then it makes its way out through so we have the hiatal sphincter at the top of the stomach, and then we have the pyloric sphincter at the bottom of the stomach that lets the food, as it's all ground up now by the stomach, lets it start to enter the small intestines where we can start to absorb the nutrients and the water from it. So that's kind of how the stomach works. And so the idea is that you have this muscle that closes off so that as the stomach is gurgling around and squeezing and massaging all of this food so that it mixes up with the stomach acid, we don't want that stomach acid to go back up into the esophagus. The lining of the esophagus needs to have a pretty close to 7.4 pH, which is kind of neutral, whereas the stomach needs 4.3 pH for acidity in order to break the food down. So this trap door here, right, this should be a one-way street in order to protect the esophagus. And if it's dysfunctional, if we lose the tone of this muscle and the sphincter does not close tightly, then the acid can reflux back up into the basic meaning 7.4 pH unprotected esophagus, and that's going to irritate the esophagus. And for some people, it's so uncomfortable. Like people say, I thought I was having a heart attack because it was the painfulness and the tension, the pressure. And modern life, as we see more and more, it is so stressful. People have this chronic social stress. They're choking down foods, and they're crappy foods that they're eating. They're sedentary and they're sitting all the time. And that creates thoracic spine problems. And all this can start to affect the body. So here it's the inside of the gut and the stomach. The food bolus settles at the bottom. And then that should then mix up and start to break down that food so that it can then pass through into the pyloric sphincter and then go throughout the body. So this is a tonal issue where the valve has lost its tone and it can't keep the food in the stomach. And what also can happen is when it loses its tone, the stomach itself can actually start to move up into this, the diaphragm is coming over the stomach, and it has this sphincter. And so that the stomach can actually move up into through that sphincter. So it's actually up into the esophageal area. So when we encounter people that are struggling with acid reflux and heartburn, typically we're going to see it in this T4 to T6 area where we find the subluxations. And we talk about it as actually a physical component, because oftentimes we'll see it relate to people that have had car accidents and sports traumas that can actually start the problem. But nowadays, we have to add to it the poor posture that comes from the computer slouch. The forward head carriage is one of the primary causes. So, you know, if that T4 to T6 is affecting the tone of the valve, but then imagine if the body is in a poor posture that's compressing and putting more pressure in the whole abdominal cavity, that's going to push the stomach, put pressure on the stomach, and if the valve isn't tight, it's going to actually push more and more of the gastric juices up into the esophagus. So again, if you struggle with GERD or heartburn, acid reflux, please just text us gut talk to our number, and I'd love to just get on a 10-minute call with you and see if it's something that we think we can help. Now, as we said, we think of GERD as very much a physical piece, and we think of the micro trauma of poor posture. And as I said, you know, these digestive issues, they can affect all ages, but look at the posture throughout the ages here, both the young folks and the older folks, all of them looking down at their devices, and that is creating poor posture, and it's creating something called tech neck. And it's gotten so bad that actually it's the incidence of GERD is becoming more and more and more. And I think it's highly related to the poor posture that we have from using devices. So those upper thoracic subluxations and indigestion, it's some of the most common things that I find. And, you know, all of us gals, none of us want that humpback thing, you know, that dowager's hump. But the most unhealthy positions, they affect the viscera. It's not as easy to breathe with that hunched posture. It affects the lungs, the heart, and it's happening all day long. And it's what the modern person is turning into. So again, remember, it is cumulative, these habits, if they are a habit, then it's cumulative because we're doing them all the time. And it's like a cavity. Causes things to get worse and worse. So therefore, we have to measure the stress that's there. We have to see whether the subluxations are causing these problems. And once we measure it, then we know whether or not we can help. So when people come into our office to find out whether or not they have subluxations, we use 5 objective criteria. We use the instrumentation that I just mentioned to you. We also use motion palpation to see whether the joints have that fixation that is classic for subluxations, whether the muscles have spasmed and strapped down that joint. We'll use static palpation to just palpate, is that joint actually misaligned? And then we look at posture. So visualization is looking at posture. Is that head being carried forward, which is going to put that stress on that vagus nerve? And then also we'll use x-rays to see whether or not people have not only the loss of the curves in the spine, but also if there's any degenerative change, which tells us that that subluxation has been uncorrected for a long period of time. And then the 3 steps to correcting the cause: we have to break the bad habits that create the subluxations and create the irritation in the digestive system. Bad habits with how we're eating, whether or not we're getting enough rest, how we're dealing with stress, bad habits about posture and exercise. And then we want to add in specific spinal exercises to get the spine healthier. And then, of course, we have to correct the damage, correct the subluxations that are there. So that is the 3-legged stool, the model we use of how we get our great results. And another dangerous belief is that, oh, there's nothing that can be done. I've tried everything and there's nothing that can be done. Well, that's what Dr. Zano thought until he actually was introduced to a chiropractor, and then he got his great results. So remember, procrastination is the thief of health. And so I don't want you to procrastinate. Whatever you've learned tonight, I want you to start using what you've learned. So if you need to start to address your posture, or you need to start to address your diet, I want you to just take some action steps. And I hope you've taken some notes tonight so that you can, think about how you are going to take your action steps. And if you have any questions and you want to have a talk down things, again, just send us a text so that we can set up a 10-minute consultation and know whether or not we can help. So thank you so much for spending the time with us. That is the end of our presentation. And again, if you'd like to review this, we have the recording. And so we're going to be happy to share that with you as well. I want to now close down our presentation, and we're going to stop the recording, but I'll open it up for questions for anybody that is on the call live with us.